I know you've been through a lot this morning, and I promise I'll keep this very short, but hopefully you'll also find this inspiring. So as Gary said, we're obviously focused at the Mix on surfacing the best stories on management innovation from around the world. And many of these stories you're seeing on stage today. But we've been working with some progressive companies in trying to tackle some of their most fundamental challenges in a way that is socially constructive, that is, in a way that involves everyone in the organization. And we call this the management hackathon approach, and some of you who have participated in our online public hackathons have kind of gotten a sense of how this works, but we just wanted to give you a very quick update on our latest thinking on this topic. And before we dive in, quick quiz to get us started. So can you guess what is one thing about change management that doesn't seem to be changing much at all? Any guesses? Perfect. It's the failure rate. So 70% of large-scale transformations fail. And it doesn't matter what kind of transformation you're talking about. It could be strategy, it could be business process reengineering, TQM, M&A integrations. They all have the same dismal record, and it doesn't matter who measures it and when this is measured. This has been persisting for decades. And we were puzzling about this. It's kind of a crazy statistic. And there are a few different hypotheses for why this might be. One is we just are set totally unrealistic expectations about what change programs can achieve. But if that were really the reason why, you'd expect this number, the expectations to calibrate, right, with the success rate, and that hasn't happened. The second reason for why this might be happening is that we just don't understand the building blocks of change. But John Kotter wrote a book in 1996 where he outlined 8 very useful building blocks, things like building a sense of urgency, or focus on small wins and quick wins. And other people have built on that ever since, and so there's a whole stream of knowledge about change management and how that works, and so we don't really believe that's the problem either. We think the problem is deeper, and it really has to do with the assumptions that we hold about who initiates change and how change is implemented in organizations. And there are 3 particular assumptions about change that are very toxic. So the first is that change starts at the top. So what that means is that change is that episodic interruption of the normal. The normal is stasis, status quo. And the only people who get to make the big calls about change, the direction of change, and the timing of change are those at the very top. And notwithstanding enlightened CEOs like Tony Hsieh and Vineet, right, this is a problem because often executives are the last to know. They're surrounded by layers of managers who are very hesitant to sound the alarm bell. And by the time an issue becomes big enough to warrant the time and attention of CEO, it's typically too late. The organization is already playing defense. And that's why a lot of the change programs start on a back foot. They are catch-up programs. So a lot of you might have heard the notion of a burning platform. You need a burning platform to get change going. And these were the words that then CEO of Nokia, Stephen Elop, used in a very candid memo he wrote to the company in 2011. He said, we are on a burning platform, Nokia. We got to do something about it. So this was 4 years after Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone to the world. This is 2007 in January. And basically, the platform had been burning for 4 years. Right, and by the time Stephen Elop, and I don't want to pick on him, poor guy, he had this realization, it was already toast. There was nothing else to burn, right? So, and they were already on the slide, on the vertical path of this slide in market share, they lost half of it by 2011, and there was no turning back. So that's one assumption. The second assumption is that change is cascaded. And I love the term cascade, right? Because it makes you think of beautiful waterfall. So change is something that is natural. It just flows from the mountain, right? But who are we kidding, right? We're talking about scripting change and telling people what to do, right? And surprise, surprise, when you just shove change down people's throats, they tend to resist it. And in fact, the resistance to change is the top reason why change programs fail. It's just forced and people don't embrace it. And the third, I think, toxic or self-limiting belief about change is that it's engineered. So we tend to think of transformational changes like building a bridge. And that doesn't apply to deep change. It may apply to an ERP implementation perhaps, but not if you're trying to radically transform the strategy or the operating model of the company. And so change becomes too blunt. And it's typically either too limited and incremental on the one hand, or it's too radical and dangerous on the other. And to give you a sense of a company that embraced a heavy dose of engineered and cascaded change, think of JCPenney when Ron Johnson took over in 2011 and the end of the year. JCPenney is a home department store in the United States. They weren't doing so great, so they brought Ron Johnson, who had retail at Apple. And he brought a couple of other lieutenants from outside the company in literally a space of 2 months, engineered a whole transformation, totally radical transformation that included very different pricing models, a very different store layout. You can see here, the reality is what JCPenney looks like, which is a very kind of uninspiring bazaar, and he basically wanted to turn it into a big Apple store. And he also wanted to, as he called it, cleanse the culture, right, of JCPenney. This is a company that was been in operation since 1902. And so he wanted to discard most of JCPenney. And surely there were things about JCPenney you wanted to give up, but he was just very blunt about it. And he did this, as I said, in a space of 3 months, 0 consultation with store employees, 0 consultations with middle managers. If you actually spoke up and said, well, this may not work, you were kicked out. 0 experimentation with the customer, right? Especially the pricing. These are people that go, when they go to JCPenney, they go for coupons and discounts, and he got rid of all of that. And guess what happened? It was a disaster, right? So all the traditional customers left. No new customers, or at least not enough, came to compensate for that loss. In 2012, JCPenney lost $4 billion in revenue. They posted a net loss of $1 billion, and 20,000 employees got fired. And by the time Ron Johnson left, they lost half of their market price. This is a total disaster. Now, many change programs don't fail at the level at the epic level of JCPenney. I think you have to try kind of hard, right, to get this level of disaster. But a lot of the change programs that fail share some of the same DNA, the change management DNA that caused Nokia and JCPenney to miss their future. And we would argue that unless you change that DNA, we're not going to make any progress at all in pushing that 70% rate down to a much more reasonable number. And so our thinking, and very much building on what other companies have done, and Ellen and Jackie are showing us the way, is to think of change as not something you program, but as a platform you build, right? And there are 3 shifts that we think need to happen. The first is that you need to go from top down to activist out. So you need to syndicate the responsibility for initiating change to everyone. And NHS Change Day is a perfect example of that. The second shift is that you need to go from something you need to sell with good communications and pamphlets to something you invite people to do. One way to get deep commitment from people is to bid out the how of the change effort, right? Get other people to help you think about how change should unfold. And the third shift is going from managed change to organic change. So instead of scripting everything, all the change process, as John mentioned earlier today, with a big implementation plan, Gantt chart and the like, rely less on that and rely more on communities and experimentation to evolve the change process over time. Now, one of my favorite examples, in addition to NHS Change Day, of a change platform is Cemex, and Gilberto Garcia from Cemex is here. He'll talk later today, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But they've been at this for 5 years almost. And they built their platform is called Shift. They have 1,200 self-organizing communities that implement change initiatives without anybody's permission every day. And some of these initiatives are very tactical and incremental. Others are fantastically strategic. For instance, these communities are behind the creation of the global brands of cement that now, and value-added services attached to it, that now account for 1/3 of the company's revenue. And this is unprecedented in the cement industry, which is very, very localized. And the lesson I take away from this example, and even from the NHS example, is that change actually can be very, very natural, right? If you just set up a platform for people to come together and work on shared priorities. Now, this is all very inspiring, very interesting, but how do we actually get this to happen, right? Practically speaking. Said differently, how do we hack some of the most fundamental aspects of an organization, its culture, its strategy, its business models, its management models. How do we do all of that in a way that counters the concentration of authority and inertia that sits at the top of the organization? How do we get consistency and consensus without someone telling you what to do, by making that something that is decentralized? And how do we combine energy and insights in a way that leads to radical yet practical ideas? I mean, one of the problems that large-scale collaboration efforts often have is that they have a lowest common denominator, right? So you get mediocrity. So how do you get a lot of people involved, but in a way that spawns radical insights? And this is a really tough problem. It's not something you're going to solve by putting up a wiki and telling people, go, do it, good luck, come back to us in 3 months and tell us what you've done. This is a very, very difficult problem. And we certainly don't have all the answers, but we've done enough of these hackathons to have a few ideas on the things you should do and the things you should not do to build a change platform. So I'm going to take a few minutes and go through these with you quickly. So let's say you've identified a big problem that you want to solve in an organization. So the thing you don't want to do is to say, let's build a task force with the usual suspects, and this time they'll figure it out. Not a good idea. What you should instead do is invite everybody to participate in the process of hacking the issue. Right? And this could be very simple. The way we typically do it when we work with companies is have the CEO or some other leader write a blog, very informal, and say, look, we have this problem. We've had it maybe for a long time. We haven't been able to solve it. We need everybody's help. I want you to come and help us. Right? You're asking for volunteers. You're leveraging their energy and their passion. You're not just conscripting people to the effort. Okay. Second thing you should not do is gloss over the issues that might have led to that problem. Right, and just have, we've had a problem, but let's just now focus on, the solution. It's actually really important to have an honest conversation about what caused it, what led up to it, what are the root causes of it, what are the barriers, and this is for a few reasons. The first is, Linus Torvalds said this about software development. Like the more eyes you have to look at a problem, the more shallow the bugs are. Right, so. The more people that can help you build a picture of all the issues that are wrong with that particular organization, the better that picture is. And your solutions are only going to be as deep as the diagnosis that you have. The second, which Vineet mentioned yesterday, is that having people talk about the problem is actually the first step in getting them to embrace and own it. Right? So mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the ugliest of them all. The third thing you should not do is once you figure out you want to go ahead and solve the problem is use benchmarks, analysis, expertise to quickly converge on an answer. Now, all those things are very important. We're not saying get rid of them, but they're the starting point, not the end point of the change program. What we should rather do is have the community spend a sufficient amount of time diverging and generating an enormous dozens or hundreds of ideas on how you might solve the problem, and have these ideas compound and combine, and be very sensitive about the patterns that are emerging from these streams of ideas, and make sure that the ideas that may seem crazy at first don't get squashed right away. And then once you've done that, converge. And actually convergence, once you've done that, will be much easier to do as well. Okay, fourth thing you should not do, and John mentioned this earlier, let's say you have a number of ideas you want to take forward, don't script them out in a big implementation plan that covers the next 18 months. What you should rather do is have a portfolio of experiments. It's something that gets managed. It gets refreshed and evolves over time. I mean, Vineet mentioned this yesterday, not initiatives, but experiments. It's not only the right thing to do, but also politically, it's a much easier kind of proposition, right? Because you're not saying everybody needs to do it this way, we have figured it out. You're creating space for uncertainty and evolution. Fifth thing you should not do is say at some point, okay, we're done, high five, we've held our milestone success. Change is something that should be persistent. It should be a constant thing. Kurt Lewin, very eminent psychologist, shaped the thinking of change management for generations when he had this, he kind of brought out this model of unfreeze, change, freeze. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. And it's a very helpful model for certain things, but in today's environment, anything that is frozen for too long becomes irrelevant, right? So what you actually need to have is permanent slush. You need to have constant experimentation, constant innovation around business practices, around operating models, around culture, much the same way as Semix and others are doing, and Zappos from earlier today. Okay, the last thing, we've talked about a lot of things that have to do with practices, which are important to build change platforms. But practices are only the beginning. You need to embrace new principles and behaviors to make this really stick. And let me just give you a very quick example. You know, the TQM movement, the total quality movement in the 90s, had a surge of adoption, but most of the adoption was at the surface level. Companies implemented quality circles and trained a bunch of people in quality tools and had cross-functional teams. Almost all those programs didn't last. And the reason for that is that the management, the leadership, didn't embrace the principles that underlie total quality management, which have to do with reducing fear, increasing trust, and giving people autonomy. And unless you do that, you know, you might have a platform that works for 6 months, but it's just going to fizzle, right? So you need to embrace those new principles. All right. I think I'm out of time, so let me close here. I hope this is something that you found interesting and inspiring for you to begin your journey for hacking change and how change happens in your organization. And if you want to learn more, we have some more thinking and materials at mhackathon.com. And of course, you can grab Polly, Gary, and me anytime during the mashup. So thanks so much, and enjoy your lunch.